Good morning, friends. Today we gather to talk about something that we've all experienced, whether we recognize it at the time or not: the unexpected. Life is filled with surprises, but there is a profound truth we must all grasp. God is in the business of doing the unexpected, and the ways He works in our lives may leave us astounded, but they are always purposeful and for our good. God's sovereign surprises are woven throughout the very fabric of our lives, yet we often struggle to recognize them. We tend to picture God working in ways that are logical, predictable, and neatly aligned with our expectations. But if history, both biblical and personal, teaches us anything, it is that God rarely follows the paths we anticipate. His ways are higher, His thoughts are beyond ours, and His timing is never rushed, yet never late. When He moves, it often leaves us in awe, not just because He has answered a prayer, but because He has done so in a way we never saw coming. Think of the young shepherd boy David. No one, not even his own father, considered him a likely candidate to be king. Yet God saw in David what no one else did. While others looked at outward strength and stature, God looked at the heart. In Bible we are said that when the prophet Samuel arrived at Jesse's house to anoint a king, he was prepared to choose one of David's older, stronger brothers. But God had a different plan, an unexpected one. David, the overlooked one, was chosen to lead a nation. The same God who chose a shepherd to be king is the one who moves in unexpected ways in our lives. When doors seem closed, when opportunities seem lost, He is often preparing something far greater than we could imagine. We see this pattern repeated in the life of Joseph. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, wrongfully imprisoned, his life seemed to spiral further from anything resembling a blessing. Yet, even in the darkest moments, God was setting the stage for something greater. Joseph himself later realized that what others intended for harm, God used for good. In Bible, we are said that God orchestrates all things according to His divine purpose, even the hardships, the betrayals, and the disappointments. What seems like a setback is often a setup for a greater purpose. And then there is the ultimate sovereign surprise, the coming of the Messiah. The people expected a mighty warrior, a king who would overthrow their oppressors with force. Instead, He arrived as a child, born in a manger, growing up as a humble carpenter. No one expected salvation to look like this. Yet in His humility, in His suffering, in the very act of laying down His life, He accomplished what no earthly ruler could. In Bible we are said that His ways confound the wise, that He uses the weak to shame the strong, that the greatest among us will be the servant of all. The kingdom of God is built on these divine reversals, where the least become the greatest, and the unexpected becomes the very foundation of His work. When we look at our own lives, we must remember this truth. God's plan is not bound by our understanding. He moves beyond our expectations, often taking us on paths we never would have chosen, only to reveal in time that those paths led us exactly where we needed to be. There are moments in life when we feel stuck, as if we are standing in a place where nothing seems to change and no breakthrough appears on the horizon. Then suddenly, in the most unexpected way, God steps in. His interventions are never random. They are precisely timed, divinely orchestrated, and often come in ways we could never have imagined. When He moves, He does so with authority, shifting circumstances, opening doors that were once shut, and making a way where there was. His interventions remind us that He is in control, even when life seems uncertain. Consider the Israelites standing before the Red Sea, trapped between an impassable body of water and an army closing in behind them. From a human perspective, there was no way out. fear gripped their hearts and doubt crept in. But God was not limited by what they could see. In Bible, we are said that He parted the waters before them, turning what seemed like an obstacle into a pathway to freedom. No one could have anticipated that the very sea blocking their escape would become their deliverance. God's interventions do not always follow human logic, but they are always perfect in their purpose. We see this again in the life of Elijah. He was in a desperate situation, hiding from those who sought to take his life, weary and worn out from the weight of his calling. In his exhaustion, he might have expected God to send help in a grand and visible way, perhaps through an army of angels or a supernatural display of power. Yet God's intervention came in the most unexpected form, a still, small voice. In the Bible, we are said that God is not always found in the wind, the fire, or the earthquake, but in the gentle whisper. His interventions are not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they come in quiet moments, when He speaks to the depths of our hearts, reminding us that He is near. And then there is the story of Paul and Silas, imprisoned for preaching the gospel. Chained and locked away, it would have seemed that their mission was over. But instead of despairing, they worshipped. And as they worshipped, God intervened. Not through an army storming the prison, but through an earthquake that shook the very foundations of the jail, breaking their chains and setting them free. In Bible, we are said that even the prison doors could not hold them when God chose to move. What seemed like a moment of defeat became a testimony of His power. God's interventions often come when we least expect them, in ways we could never have planned for ourselves. Sometimes He removes obstacles, and other times He strengthens us to walk through them, whether through a miraculous act, an unlikely opportunity, or a quiet assurance in our spirit. His intervention always arrives in perfect time, revealing that He is present, active, and always working on our behalf. Faith is easy when the path is clear, when the answers come quickly, and when life unfolds as expected. But the true test of faith comes when we cannot see the way forward, when God seems silent, and when circumstances appear to contradict His promises. It is in these moments that we must hold on, trusting not in what we see, but in the unshakable nature of the One who has never failed. Faith is not built in comfort. It is forged in the unknown, in the waiting, in the moments when all we have left is to believe that God is still working behind the scenes. Abraham understood this kind of faith. He was called to leave everything familiar, to step into an unknown land with only a promise to hold on to. There was no map, no visible guarantee of what lay ahead, yet he moved forward. In Bible, we are said that Abraham believed even when there was no reason to hope, and because of that faith, he was counted as righteous. The journey was long, the waiting was difficult, but God was faithful. Every step Abraham took without seeing the full picture was a declaration of trust in the One who had spoken. Faith beyond sight is what sustained the Israelites as they marched around the walls of Jericho. From a human perspective, their actions made no sense. They were not called to fight or to storm the city, but to walk in obedience, trusting that God would bring the walls down in His own way. Day after day, they circled the city with no visible change, no sign that their obedience was making a difference. But on the final day, when they obeyed one last time, the walls fell. In Bible, we are said that God's ways are higher than ours, and His instructions may not always make sense in the moment, but obedience in faith always leads to breakthrough. Peter experienced this when he stepped out of the boat. The wind was strong, the waves were high, but in that moment his eyes were locked on Jesus, and he did what no man could do. He walked on water. It was only when he looked at his circumstances that fear took hold, and he began to sink. In Bible we are said that as long as our focus remains on God, we can stand firm even in the middle of storms. The moment we shift our eyes to the chaos around us, doubt creeps in and fear takes over. Faith is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the decision to trust God despite uncertainty. It is knowing that even when we cannot see what He is doing, He is still moving. It is believing that His promises will come to pass, even when circumstances say otherwise. And it is holding on to the truth that He is always working, even when all we see is silence. God is not limited to grand gestures or miraculous signs. He often works in the smallest, most ordinary moments of life. It is easy to expect His presence in extraordinary events, but His power is just as evident in the everyday. The moments that seem routine, the encounters that feel insignificant, and the circumstances that feel insignificant, and the circumstances that appear mundane, can all be tools in His divine plan. He moves in ways that may not always be dramatic, but are always intentional, using the ordinary to accomplish the extraordinary. A young boy brought 5 loaves and 2 fish to Jesus. In his hands it was nothing, just a small meal, insignificant in the face of thousands of hungry people. But in the hands of Jesus, it became a feast that satisfied the multitudes. In Bible we are said that what we see as small, God sees as sufficient when surrendered to Him. The miracle was not just in the multiplication of food, but in the willingness of a child to offer what little he had. God takes what seems insignificant and turns it into more than enough. A Samaritan woman went to a well, expecting nothing more than to draw water. She was living a life marked by shame and isolation, avoiding the crowds and carrying the weight of her past. But that simple trip to the well became the turning point of her entire life. In Bible we are said that Jesus met her there, not in a temple or before a large crowd, but in the quiet of her daily routine. A conversation about water led to the revelation of the Messiah, and her testimony brought many to faith. God transformed an ordinary moment into an eternal encounter. A widow in Zarephath gathered a few sticks to prepare her last meal before she and her son faced starvation. To the world, her situation seemed hopeless, her resources depleted. But when she obeyed the instruction to first serve the prophet Elijah, the little she had did not run out. In Bible we are said that God provided daily, not with an overflowing abundance at once, but with just enough for each day. The oil and flour never failed, sustaining her family in a time of drought. What seemed small in human eyes became a testimony of God's provision. The work of God is not always seen in the parting of seas or the calling down of fire from heaven. Sometimes it is in the kindness of a stranger, in an unexpected opportunity, or in the quiet conviction of the heart. He moves through the ordinary to reveal His extraordinary love. What seems routine may be the very place where He is doing His greatest work. The miracle is often hidden in obedience, in small acts of faith, in daily steps that seem insignificant at the time, but lead to something far greater than we could have imagined. God's timing is unlike anything we can comprehend. We live in a world where instant gratification is the norm, where waiting feels uncomfortable, and where answers to our prayers are expected on our timetable. But God does not operate according to our schedules. His timing is perfect, and while we may feel delayed or discouraged, we must remember that His delays are not denials. God is never in a hurry, yet He is never late. He is always working in the background, preparing everything for the right moment, even when we cannot see it. Think of Sarah and Abraham, who waited for decades for the promised child. Their hope seemed to diminish with each passing year, and the promise of God appeared to be slipping further out of reach. But in Bible, we are said that God's promises are not bound by human limitations. The child, Isaac, came at exactly the right time, when it seemed impossible, when all hope was lost, and when they could not rely on their own strength. God's timing was not delayed. It was divinely perfect. Moses also experienced God's perfect timing. When he fled Egypt, he likely believed he had been abandoned by God, and that his mission to deliver the Israelites had ended before it even began. He spent 40 years in the wilderness, a long, seemingly fruitless period of waiting. Yet, in Bible we are said that God was preparing Moses in ways he could not understand. When the time came for God to act, Moses returned to Egypt and, by the power of God, led the people out of slavery. It wasn't just Moses who needed preparation, it was the people as well. God's timing brought deliverance at the moment when it would have the greatest impact and fulfillment. Even in the life of Jesus, we see God's perfect timing. Many times, people tried to force his hand, to make him act before it was time. But Jesus was never rushed. His ministry unfolded exactly as it was meant to. When he performed miracles, when he taught, and even when he allowed himself to be arrested, he did so according to God's perfect schedule. In the Bible we are said that when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son. Jesus did not rush the process of salvation. He walked the path laid before him in perfect step with God's will, trusting that everything would unfold at just the right moment. In our own lives, God's timing often feels difficult to trust. We pray for answers and breakthroughs, but the waiting can seem endless. Yet the Bible assures us that God's timing is trustworthy. When we face delays, we are being prepared, just as Sarah and Moses were. When we don't see immediate results, we are being refined, just as Jesus was. His timing may not always align with our desires, but it always aligns with his purpose. When the right time comes, everything will fall into place, and we will see the wisdom of God's timing, even in the waiting. God often uses the unexpected to transform our hearts, minds, and lives. We tend to look at our circumstances and assume that they define us, especially when things don't go as planned. But in reality, it is through the unexpected, through the moments of struggle and confusion, that God shapes us into the people He has called us to be. These unexpected events are not just inconveniences or obstacles, they are divine opportunities for growth, transformation, and refinement. Consider the story of Job. He was a man who had everything: wealth, health, a family, and in an instant it all seemed to be taken away. His world crumbled, and his suffering was unimaginable. Yet, in Bible we are said that through his suffering, Job's understanding of God deepened. He learned to trust God, even when he couldn't see the reason for his pain. Job's transformation was not instant. It was through the unexpected losses, the long moments of questioning, and the painful waiting that he became a man of greater faith. What seemed like a tragedy was actually the very thing that brought him into a deeper relationship with God, a more profound understanding of his sovereignty. We see this same principle in the life of Peter. He boldly declared his loyalty to Jesus, only to deny him 3 times when faced with fear and pressure. Peter's failure was unexpected, especially for someone so confident in his devotion. But in Bible, we are said that Jesus, in his mercy, restored Peter not through condemnation, but through a personal encounter, asking him 3 times if he loved him. Peter's denial became the catalyst for his restoration and growth. It was through his brokenness that he was able to embrace a new level of grace, humility, and purpose. The unexpected failure did not define Peter. Instead, it was the beginning of a new chapter in his journey with Christ. Even the Apostle Paul experienced the transforming power of the unexpected. His life was dramatically changed when he encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. Paul, once a fierce persecutor of Christians, was blinded and confronted by Christ in a way that shook him to his core. His life, as he knew it, was turned upside down. But in Bible we are said that in the midst of his transformation, God revealed his plan for Paul's life, one that would take him to the ends of the earth, spreading the message of salvation. The unexpected encounter with Christ did not just change Paul's mission, it changed the very nature of who he was. The same Saul who had been blinded by his own pride became Paul, the apostle, whose letters would shape the future of the church. Through the unexpected, God is constantly at work, molding and refining us. It is often in the moments of loss, confusion, and discomfort that we experience the most significant transformation. These are the times when we are forced to let go of our own understanding and rely completely on God. We may not always understand why things happen the way they do, but we can trust that in those moments, God is doing a deeper work in us. The unexpected is not something to fear or resist. It is a tool in God's hand, shaping us into the people He has destined us to be. In the journey of life, God consistently surprises us by working in ways we never expect. His actions are often beyond our understanding, yet they are always perfectly timed and purposeful. Whether it's through seemingly impossible circumstances, like the parting of the Red Sea, or through quiet moments of transformation, God is always at work, shaping us, preparing us, and revealing His power in ways that defy our expectations. His timing may seem delayed, but it is always perfect. Through every challenge, every waiting season, and every unexpected twist, He is not only working in our lives, but using those moments to refine our faith and grow us closer to Him. As we trust in His sovereign plan, we can rest assured that even the unexpected is part of His divine design, leading us toward the greater purpose He has for us.